I thank you for taking the concepts of proposed Bill 611 and incorporating them into SJR 71. I begin with a premise. Now is the time for new ideas. Now is the time for bold ideas. Now is the time to change the way we're doing things to make our actions more efficient, more effective, and more accountable. It is in this spirit that I recommend to you a new legislative structure based not on two redundant houses, but simply on one accountable chamber, in short, a unicameral legislature. A unicameral legislature will be more efficient. It could and should save money for our taxpayers. If, as the bill proposes, there were 60 representatives, each reflecting approximately 60,000 residents, that would reduce the number of total representatives from the current 187 to the proposed 60, yielding more than a 2/3 reduction in the number of total positions. This would allow the 60 representatives to become full-time, draw a decent salary, and still save the state an appreciable amount of dollars in the salary account. Likewise, on the legislative staff side of the equation, there could be a strengthening of the current legislative offices, including perhaps a general accounting office or perhaps an inspector general's office or both, while at the same time saving total expenditures. The net result would be a stronger and more effective legislature, one that can both better predict and evaluate the results of its actions. A unicameral legislature would, I believe, be more accountable and efficient with only one body responsible for legislation. The current practice of bills, quote, dying on the calendar, unquote, could end. Likewise, our committee work would become more important. There would be less of a tendency to move along a bill as a, quote, work in progress. Votes in committee would have much more meaning. With only one chamber, there would be no blaming the other chamber if, as today, a bill passes one chamber and is not taken up in the other. Final action would indeed be final action. This greater accountability would be even more so if you incorporate my suggestion for the legislature to become full-time. This change would vastly strengthen the oversight function of the legislature, which today is weak and understaffed. It would allow for legislators to gain greater knowledge in their areas of cognizance and become an expert in that area. Along with a 4-year term, a unicameral legislature would end the wasteful practice of the yearly deluge of thousands of bills that are introduced with ultimately only a few hundred bills being passed. It would be a strong attempt at improving the quality of both the process of the legislation and the product of our deliberations. Let me try to wrap up. I would also recommend, although not part of this bill, that we look at cutting the number of committees that the legislature has in half. Particularly, we have a finance and appropriation. Like an example would be we have a finance and appropriation committee, both dealing with money, but having a hard time sometimes getting together. That should be one committee, a Ways and Means committee. Unicameral legislature is not a familiar idea. However, there are many countries. Nebraska is one state that has it. New Zealand, Iceland, Slovenia, Sweden, Denmark. There are a variety of countries around the world that have, and if you think about our local governments, they are almost all unicameral legislatures, as our county governments, some of which are larger than the state of Connecticut, around the country, are almost all unicameral legislatures. So I ask you today, as I have had the vision and the courage to bring this bill up before this committee, to have the further vision and the courage to allow the statewide electorate to vote on this proposal and to trust in their judgment as they voice their opinion. One final thought, we have a government in which Representative Spallone, Mr. Chairman, is co-chairing the Commission on Government Reorganization. This would be, I think, an appropriate idea to send in front of that commission also.
Thank you very much, Senator. Are there any questions for Senator LeBeau? Representative Drew.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Senator. Thank you very much. It's an intriguing and provocative idea. Have you had the chance much to study much in maybe some other countries, Western Europe, South America, all over the world for that matter, whether there are upper and lower chambers and really what's been the practical impact, and are you aware of any real unbiased analysis and studies of these? You know, we have our own history in this country, and maybe other countries have other reasons, unique reasons perhaps, for what I'll call upper and lower chambers, to use that expression. But what are some of the practices, and what are some of the consequences of this? Is to the extent, you know, I know it's a big, broad question, you know, but I wonder if you have any information in that regard.
Let me give you an example. What happened in Nebraska in 1937 when it passed its unicameral legislature bill. The following year, they had half the bills and introduced, and they passed almost as many as they had the prior year. They also did it at about half the cost. that's one specific thing. I know that unicamerals, I don't think there is, and I'm not sure it's possible to do an objective study. I do have a lot of information which I'd be glad to supply to the Committee on Research that I've done in unicameral legislatures, and if you'd like that, I could supply it. But there are unicams virtually all over the world. Costa Rica, in South America, Central America. There's Uganda in Africa. Europe has a good number of them. Iceland, kind of northern belt. Iceland, Sweden, Denmark, Slovenia, Hungary. So there are a variety of places that have adopted this. I mean, I think if you think about why we have two houses of the legislature, it's really following, in Connecticut, it's really following the federal example. And the federal example, if you go look at federal, what that's all about was kind of the big state, small state compromise proposed by our own Roger Sherman from Connecticut to kind of figure out how to satisfy the small states and in terms of their power within a legislature and satisfy the large states to ensure that they had, in a sense, more power because they had more people. But how does that apply to Connecticut? It just doesn't fit. But we kind of, I think, adopted that, and also because of the historical example of the House of Lords and the House of Commons in Great Britain. And that has really become more and more of a unicameral legislature because the House of Lords really has no power these days. So, I mean, I think we're kind of stuck in history here. And frankly, I think we're at a time where people are asking to change history and to say, let's look at things anew, let's look at things fresh, and let's try to come up with better ways of doing things.